Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel English Literature 101. Today we are going to start a new series of video on the topic History of English Literature, wherein we will be discussing all the ages or periods of English literature. This topic is very important for all students pursuing English literature. So today we will start our series with the first period of English literature, which is Anglo-Saxon period. This video will be a bit lengthy as we are going to cover all the small and minute details regarding this particular period, which will be beneficial for you all. So watch the video till the end. So without any further delay, let's begin with the topic. Anglo-Saxon period. Anglo-Saxon period is also known as Old English period, which dates from 450 to 1066 AD. This period opens in 5th century and concludes in the year 1066 AD. To understand this period properly, at first we need to understand the chart, specifically the dates and the story behind it. I would recommend you to memorize this chart as it is very important. Okay, so now let's begin with the story. At first we come across Celts. Now who were Celts? Celts or Celtic people were basically the original inhabitants of Britain. They arrived at the shores of Britain at approximately 1000 BC. They were also known as Brythons and Gaels. It is from Brythons that the name Britain came into existence. So these two tribes ruled Britain for many centuries. So Celtic and Gaelic were the languages spoken. After that, around 55 BC, Britain was attacked or invaded by the Romans, called the Roman Conquest, by emperors like Julius Caesar and others. And finally, Britain became a part of Roman Empire. They continued to rule for about 400 years, and at that point of time, Latin was the language that was imposed. And it is because of this Roman invasion that alphabets we use now are basically the Roman alphabets that came from Latin language. So Romans had a kind of a strong military force, and therefore they were able to rule Britain for a long time. But a turning point came during 407 AD, when the Romans had to leave Britain, as Rome, their motherland, was invaded by a cruel tribe named Visigoths. So Roman had to leave Britain. So after the Romans left Britain, the Celts and Britain as a whole was attacked by two cruel tribes named Picts and Scots. Now these Celts called three Germanic tribes, namely Angles, Saxons and Jutes, to help them. They came to Britain and at around 407 AD, and this is known as the Anglo-Saxon invasion. They helped the Celts and threw away Picts and Scots. After these three Germanic tribes settled there, they threw away Celts from Britain. Now Britain was ruled by Anglo and Saxons mainly. As Jutes were less in number, they were thrown out. Now talking about the language, Angles had their own language. Similarly, Jutes had their own language. So these dialects became the official language of the place. And it was Angles who gave the name England and English. It is due to this powerful Angle tribe that the name of the island and the language exists. After that, in 787 AD, repeated Viking invasions started in England. It was King Alfred, the King of Wessex, who took the initiative to unite all kingdoms, and finally the Vikings were thrown out from England. Then finally comes the Norman conquest, also known as the Battle of Hastings, in the year 1066 AD. During this time, Harold Godwinson, son of Earl of Wessex, was ruling England. So this Battle of Hastings was fought between Harold of England and William, Duke of Normandy, France. and the former, that is Harold, got defeated, and thus Normans conquered over England, and this Old English period came to an end during 1066 AD. In this particular year, there was also another battle called Battle of Stamford, where England defeated Norwegian forces. But after that, William of Normandy defeated Harold in Battle of Hastings. So in order to remember the sequence, I provided you with an acronym, that is CRAVEN, where C stands for Celts, R for Roman invasion, A for Anglo-Saxon invasion, V for Viking invasion, and N for Norman conquest. Now we will talk about some important writers of this period. 5 important writers of this period are namely Caedmon, Aldhelm, Cynewulf, Bede, and King Alfred. If we talk about the manuscripts, there are basically 4 manuscripts, namely Junius manuscript, Vercelli book, Exeter book, and Beowulf manuscript. During this Old English period, most of the works were anonymous in origin, that is, we don't know about the writers. We get to know only about few poets whose name I had already mentioned. Many of the works of this period have in them a pagan past or pagan origin. Now, what is pagan? Pagan or paganism refers to persons who believed that nature is sacred and worshipped multiple nature deities. We find paganism in the works like Beowulf, Wbset, etc., that we will discuss as we proceed. Now, as time passed, at around 597, St. Augustine entered Britain and started to preach Christianity. As a result, various Christian elements were also infused in the literature of this period. Now, talking about 4 major manuscripts. First comes Junius manuscript. It is so called as it belonged to Junius, who was the librarian to Lord Arundel, and was printed in 1655. It contains Caedmonic poems, that is, poems of Caedmon. Some important poems of Caedmon are the Genesis, Exodus, Daniel, and 3 shorter poems under the title Christ and Satan. Then comes the Exeter book. This was donated to a cathedral by Bishop Leofric in 1050, and it contains 2 poems signed by Cynewulf. Vercelli book. It also contains 2 poems signed by Cynewulf. Some important poems of Cynewulf are Juliana, Elaine, Christ, the Fates of Apostles. And we find 2 poems, namely Andreas, the Dream of the Rood, in the Vercelli book. Finally comes the Beowulf manuscript, also called Novel Codex. It contains Beowulf and Judith. Next, we are going to talk about the various dialects prevalent during this period. In the beginning of the video, I talked about Craven, isn't it? If we go through it thoroughly, you will find that I talked about languages prevalent in each part, starting from Celtic language till English language, isn't it? So we find that the language in a particular time has a lot to do with power. The relationship between power and knowledge or language is intimate. Power determines the kind of knowledge or language we have. For example, when Celts were in power, Celtic language prevailed. When Romans were in power, Latin language prevailed, and so on. So every language leaves its impact on people's lives, cultures, and literature. So mainly the 4 dialects during the Old English period were Northumbrian, Mercian, which is the language of Midlands, Kentish, which is the language of Southeast, and West Saxon. The language was used by King Alfred, and this is a dialect which was also used to write the epic poem Beowulf. Now we are going to talk about the various writings, such as the poems and elegies of the time. At first, let us talk about Beowulf. Beowulf is a story of Germanic warrior. The setting is 5th century Scandinavia. Beowulf fights monsters, dragons, and pursues for glory for himself, the king, and all the people of the place. Beowulf was a Geatish warrior who comes to help Hrothgar, the king of Danes, to fight Grendel the monster, who killed various Danish warriors in a mid-hall named Heorot. Beowulf kills Grendel. Later on, his mother, that is Grendel's mother, tries to avenge Grendel's death. Beowulf, along with few Danish and Geatish soldiers, fight Grendel's mother and kills her by slaying her with a sword. Then he frees Danes from the monster and receives gifts, treasures, and goes back to his main land, that is Geatland. Geatland at that point of time was ruled by Hygelac. After Hygelac died, Beowulf becomes the king. He rules for about 50 years and then the place is attacked by a dragon. He kills the dragon with the help of his servant Wiglaf but dies in the process. At the end, a mound is prepared for Beowulf. Wbset. It is an Anglo-Saxon poem found in the Exeter book. It is an account of the wanderings of a Germanic minstrel and of the legends he relates. The poem gives an excellent description of minstrel's life in the Germanic heroic age. It is about 150 lines in verse. It closes with a brief comment on the importance and fame of poets like Wbset. Voltaire consists of two fragments, 63 lines in all. It talks about the exploits of Walter of Aquitaine. The Fight at Finnsburg. It is a fragment of some 48 lines. It is the battle between Frisians and the Danish party. The Battle at Brunanburh. It is a piece of a famous battle which took place in 937. It is a battle between English and combined force of Scots, Vikings and Britons. The Battle of Maldon. This is a battle which took place in 993. It contains sentiments expressed by a warrior named Breithwold. It is a battle between Saxons and Vikings. Now let's talk about the various elegies. The Wanderer. It is an elegy of 115 lines by an unknown Anglo-Saxon poet. It is the lamentation of a young man for his dead master. The wanderer travels in a ship alone and friendless, seeking a home for peace and protection under a new lord. The poem is purely personal but attains the universality by virtue of its presentation. The Seafarer. It is a poem of some 100 lines. This poem is a monologue of a seaman and a dialogue between two sailors, one old and the other young. Dior's Lament. It is a poem of 42 lines, divided into stanzas, and it is included in the Exeter book. It is the lamentation of Dior, a scop, who after years of service has been supplanted by another minstrel, Heranda. Finally, he consoles himself by considering the misfortune of others. The Wife's Lament. It is a kind of a monologue. The narrator is a woman whose husband has left her and gone to sea. She is forced to live in an old dwelling dug under an oak tree by her husband's relatives. She sits under the tree and laments over her miserable lot all the day. Friendless and forsaken, she bewails her loneliness and the vows of love that have come to nothing. The poem is rich in melancholy feeling. The Husband's Message. An exiled husband sends his message to his wife by means of letters carved on a piece of wood. The wood tells the wife its own life story and its journey in a ship. It tells her that though the circumstances let her husband out of home, he has been able to gain a position of wealth and dignity. Finally, it bids her to join her husband in the place of exile. To some critics, the poem is a sequel to The Wife's Lament, but some would see it as an independent poem. So we find that lamenting, mourning on loss of happiness, loss of someone, and in religious sense, loss of transitoriness of life on earth are the various characteristics of Anglo-Saxon elegies. Now let us talk about the various prose writers of the Old English period. First comes King Alfred. King Alfred is the father of English prose. Some of his popular translations are Pastoral Care of Pope Gregory, History of the World of Orosius, Bid's Ecclesiastical History, Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, and Soliloquies of Saint Augustine. Aelfric is best known for his grammar. Some of his works include Catholic homilies, lives of saints, and translations from the scriptures. Wulfstan. He was the Bishop of Worcester and Archbishop of York. Several of his signed homilies survive. His most famous piece was Sermo Lupi ad Anglos. Now let's talk about the various features of Anglo-Saxon poetry. The first is blank verse. Anglo-Saxon poetry is written in blank verse. The term blank verse means that there is no end rhyme occurring from line to line. Secondly, it depicts the problems which arise as the theology of the church and theology of pagan world. Both are played off and against each other. Third comes the use of caesura. Caesura are basically pause in middle of the line of poetry. Fourthly, the poetic device that was used during the Old English period was alliteration. It is the repetition of a consonant sound within a line of poetry. It added sing-song effect of the time. Kennings. Kennings were another poetic device. They were metaphorical phrases to compare figurative description. And finally, another feature of Old English poetry is that it taught us moral lessons on life and righteousness. So guys, that's all for today's video. I hope that you all have understood the topic well. If you have any doubts regarding the topic, do let me know in the comment section below. And please don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. If you haven't subscribed my channel yet, I would request you to please like, share and subscribe it.